Here this time bringing you a list of upcoming indie titles that I've been keeping my eye on, but mostly these are games releasing within the next month or so, because believe it or not, with all of the large AAA releases going on, most of which have been really well received in the last couple months, as always there have also been a large amount of indies releasing, and I wanted to spotlight a few of them because most of what I'm doing in October is covering indies as far as new releases go, but given the volume of them, I quickly realized I wasn't going to be able to cover every single one, and because of that I still wanted to draw some attention to them, as I think many of these are really great in their own way. That said, I've talked about many of these games previously in some capacity, some more than others to be sure. I'm mainly talking about them now because almost all of them are releasing in October, which is a weird coincidence, so I decided to focus in on that window. Now, to get a few games out of the way that I know people are going to ask about but didn't quite fit in, some honorable mentions if you will. For starters, we have the Lamplighters League. It's not actually on this list because I don't really consider it an indie, but I will be covering it. It's a TRPG from Harebrained Schemes, looks pretty cool. Second on our honorable mentions, we have Colony Ship. From the makers of The Age of Decadence, we have an indie CRPG. And much like that game, it's pretty unique in how it approaches things like combat and mechanics, making sure that you, generally, are not the overwhelming hero type, though they do have a difficulty mode added to help out with that. But as much as I like Colony Ship, they still don't have a release date. It's probably going to release this year. I believe the last I heard was somewhere around November, but it doesn't actually have a release date yet, so we shall see. Last but not least, for the honorable mentions, we have Broken Roads, an indie CRPG with a big focus on its narrative set in a post-apocalyptic Australia. I've talked about this one a few times, but it's releasing in about the middle of November. I'll cover it when it releases, but like I said, wanted to focus on October mostly. From there, let's actually move on to the rest of the video, starting with our single game that has actually already released. It released a week or two ago, and I wanted to mention it because I think it is a really interesting title that I simply have not had time to swing back around for, and this is Wandering Sword, a Chinese martial arts RPG that puts us in the role of a young swordsman caught up in a feud that nearly kills us, but that tragic event sets us on the path of martial arts training to become the greatest of heroes. Genre-wise, the game is a tactical turn-based title with an interesting grid-style combat system we'll get into, that also features a lot of interesting things around progression and choice and consequence. It is an RPG. There are multiple endings based on your actions and the things you choose to do. There's multiple locations, systems, that for a small indie title in particular is very impressive. But mostly I want to draw your attention to the combat and progression systems. The progression systems see you unlocking passives through your Meridian map, which works in tandem with learning all sorts of martial arts to then of course provide you abilities and things to use in combat itself. And there's a lot of really interesting combinations to be had with mix and matching all the martial arts available to a character that you can then of course use in various combat scenarios. Combat takes place on this sort of tile grid system, with many abilities affecting all sorts of squares or area of effect, allowing for a system of movement that is much more free-form than the more static positioning that games like this usually take, which is where elements of the more tactical portions come in, which in combination with your abilities can be particularly interesting. So needless to say, this one has a lot going on, and while I might get to it eventually in terms of a review, it certainly looks pretty cool just overall. Moving right along though, jumping ahead to the games that are actually yet to release. First and foremost, we have Space Wreck out on October 10th. Space Wreck is an indie CRPG that puts us in the role of a ship captain with a big emphasis on replayability and a large variety of ways to approach any given situation. The game itself is relatively short. You're looking at probably like 5-ish hours for a playthrough, but there's multiple endings, multiple reasons to play through it, with a really interesting setting that sees you exploring all sorts of space wrecks, while encountering various people with their own motivations that you then have to navigate either via combat or other alternative means, in a way that reminds me of many other CRPGs, though right off the bat Underrail certainly comes to mind, minus a lot of the combat, mind you. But I've played Space Wreck a little bit already. It is available via a demo actually that you can check out right now, and it's also in early access ahead of its launch on the 10th, but overall it's a really cool game. It's definitely worth your attention if you enjoy CRPGs, which, considering I cover mostly that, I think a lot of people watching this just might be. and given its very short runtime, it could be the perfect game to fit in between the many other games releasing right around this time. Next up though, that brings us to Endless Dungeon on October 16th, a sort of follow-up to Dungeon of the Endless. This game sees us trapped on a space station with a variety of other characters as we seek to, of course, depart, as the space station itself seems to be pulling ships in and trapping them here. This particular game is a roguelike tactical strategy style game. However, it has elements of tower defense, as in order to try to escape, we have to guide a crystal robot through various levels of the space station, fighting off waves of enemies as we go. We'll be setting up defenses like turrets and things to help us with this defense, and there's a variety of other mechanics to it as well, some of which provide us more temporary progression within our own run, and then other more permanent effects that make runs easier overall, that ultimately lead to us escaping. To put this very simply, this is very similar to Hades in a lot of ways, which is why I think it might pique some people's interest, but it's also available in co-op, which is where I think a game like this will likely really shine. But you can also play with multiple characters, including in single player, that will help you out and try to defend against the waves of all these enemies. There's boss fights. Overall, though, a pretty cool game, but I do think it is the type of game that, if you have someone to play it with, is probably where it's going to shine the most. Next up, on the very next day, October 17th, we have the release of two other indie games, one of which I plan on reviewing, the other one I just think is kind of cool, with the first one being Cyberknights Flashpoint. This is a TRPG that is essentially Cyberpunk meets XCOM, where we take on a crew of individuals living in a cyberpunk dystopia and lead them through a life of heists and crime, essentially, in a cyberpunk world that's going to have us engaging with, of course, turn-based tactical combat, on top of the more management-focused areas such as building up our base, deciding which missions to go on, handling the prep work for various heists we might try to perform, before essentially handling jobs, trying to get back at the corporations that dominate the place. This particular game is meant to evoke the feeling of the tabletop versions of cyberpunk games, so where something like Cyberpunk 2077 has that more immersive feel, Cyberknights is more attempting to recreate the actual tabletop experience you might have with the old pen and paper versions of cyberpunk RPGs. Overall, though, I really like Cyberknights. It's something I checked out much earlier this year via an early access demo, and it's certainly a game with a lot of potential. So I'm excited to see if they manage to pull this off, and I'm looking forward to playing it for myself. Again, on the same day, October 17th, we also have Wizard with a Gun, which is a game that's title basically sums up most of it. We play just that, a wizard who, instead of using a wand or something as a focus, in fact uses a gun with magical bullets to cast their spells. The goal here is to gather up magic via roguelike runs out in the chaos, so to speak, which involves a tiny bit of time travel, as we gather more and more magic to both defend ourselves and also figure out what has actually happened here. There are also some minor building and crafting elements, but obviously most of the fun for this one is just the sheer amount of mayhem you can get up to, with the very simple premise of being a wizard with a gun. And while I don't really plan on reviewing this one, I do think it's an interesting title with some fun combat. I enjoy the art style in particular, and the premise is honestly just pretty funny, so I wanted to mention it here. Though before moving on, I will say this game also has a co-op element to it, so if you want to engage in some of this nonsense with a friend, that is a very viable option. Now, last up for this video, we have the game I've probably talked about the most, so I'll try to keep it a little brief, with Dark Envoy. Dark Envoy is an interesting CRPG that sees us taking on the role of two siblings, alongside a few other party members, as we ultimately get embroiled in a war between humans and elves that sees a lot of blending of technology with magic, which can cause all sorts of problems. There's going to be choice and consequence. It's mostly a mission-based system by the looks of it. But the devs behind this one, Event Horizon, also made another game I really enjoyed called Tower of Time, which was a lot better than I expected it to be. And given that Dark Envoy is a sort of loose sequel to that, I'm excited to see how this one pans out. It has a lot of interesting combat mechanics that revolve around real time with slow technically, but you can also change it to real time with pause completely, where you can draw the area of effect for various abilities. That, combined with an almost Diablo-esque loot and craft system, make for an interesting take on tactics, which is something the game focuses on heavily. However, with all of that said, as you can see, October and even a little bit beyond that is absolutely packed with upcoming indie titles that I wanted to shine a little bit of a light on. So hopefully you found something in this video you didn't know about that you're looking forward to. And while I certainly won't be able to cover all of them in terms of full-blown reviews, I do, as it stands, plan on reviewing Space Wreck, Cyberknights, Dark Envoy, and all of the honorable mentions from the start of the video. So my plate continues to be very full, though I would certainly love to know what video games everyone else is playing as the holidays are fast approaching, with many great releases yet to, of course, release. Which naturally means like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and